So when we talk about data, we can talk about how much of it is being created now, more than I think ever has been before. Talk about data that's really big, huge amounts of it. Talk about data that's open. It's important to think about how it's used and how it's collected. People have individual responsibilities in terms of thinking about how they collect pictures or take pictures or videos of other people, but we also have some responsibility to think about our own data literacy, just as we do our own digital literacy. Most people wouldn't leave their car unlocked or their house unlocked. In the same way, would you leave your phone unlocked without a passcode or a poor password on a website or a different service you use? That's a kind of digital hygiene. Some kinds of data collection, though, and usage, we don't understand or don't see. It's happening in the background. It's happening when we use our phones for different things, when we move over the surface of the earth with our phones, whether governments are tapping parts of the internet or mobile devices, whether corporations are tracking our movements through different stores. The first thing to understand is that the data is being collected in much larger amounts, that there are sensors now that are embedded in different places, the so-called smart cities movement, and that those are decisions which we want to have talked about. That if we're going to install these things, we should at least be thinking about it collectively, both as citizens, both as legislators, and as regulators of how that data is going to be used. And that usage, I think, is the most important thing to talk about, because we've seen how data can and will be used to discriminate, to round up people who we unfortunately have then seen terrible things happen to, or to make other kinds of decisions about offering them admission or employment or make relationship decisions, all kinds of things. Data in of itself can be an incredibly powerful force. So we have some control over those choices ourselves. You can think about maybe our access to our credit reports in some context, but we may not have access to the data that's being collected about us or have any say in how it's being used. Collectively, as consumers, as citizens, we can ask and advocate, but ultimately, this is probably something that governments are going to need to think about, and that's true at every level, from the city to the state to national governments, maybe even international bodies, and think about how human rights and civil rights should be coordinated with these issues. How we can ask the people who we elect, who are hoping to represent us, to stand up for our rights, to be governed, to be thinking about the ways that the data could be used so that we apply the same kinds of ethical constraints that we did in the past to the ways that our information was used to the new digital age. Hopefully those conversations are happening wherever we live, but increasingly as more uncomfortable data breaches occur, as more privacy breaches occur, as we see data used in ways that we don't expect, we'll want to have more conversations that lead to some action. Because wherever there's a huge gap between our understanding of how something is actually occurring and what we think there is, there's always going to be public outrage. And it's rare that you see good legal or regulatory decisions made when people are outraged. It's much better to get ahead and talk about the kind of society we want to live in, and then enact the kinds of rules and laws that make that happen.